I'm Padma, Rajan. I work as the Vice President of Programs, Research and Evaluation. Long title for a little person. And I've worked at this organization. It's one of 30 counties in the state of, 30 coalitions in the state of Florida. So we have 67 counties. So coalesced into 30 counties, and I work at the Early Learning Coalition of Florida, of Duval in Jacksonville, Florida. And I've worked there for about 13 years. And it's been a long time. And so when we go through my part of the presentation, we'll talk about, the genesis of how all of this evolved and where we landed. And it's just that I don't think a whole bunch of folks are using infant class. And so I looked across the country and scoured the landscape, and I realized Arizona is doing it as well. So
Arizona is. My name is Katie Romero, and I'm the Assistant Director at Southwest Human Development of Professional Education and Training. And I oversee our Quality First coaching and assessment programs at Southwest. And we are using infant class, and that's what we're here today to talk just a little bit about. So, okay, clicker work. Okay. So we'll talk just a little bit about what we're doing in Arizona, how we're implementing in the infant class into Arizona's QRIS system. And we'll take a closer look at some of the barriers or challenges that have already come up for us. And we'll share with you kind of how we've moved past some of those barriers, or what our plan is and our hope as we move further into implementation than we already are. So Arizona has a statewide quality improvement and rating system. And we put the improvement before rating because we don't rate a center when we first go in. We do get baseline assessment data. We use that data to help inform the coaching process, but they receive full 12 months of coaching before we come back and actually rate them. So we have an improvement and then a rating system in Arizona. And it is statewide. We have approximately a little more than 1,000 programs participating right now. It is voluntary for them to participate. The only criteria is that you are licensed or regulated by either by one of our regulating bodies. We have about 3 or 4 in our state, including our tribal programs. We have a number of different tribal lands in Arizona, and all of them have their own sovereign nations, which makes regulatory agencies not as cohesive as just one state agency. So assessments occur regularly, and based on your star rating, more frequently or less frequently. Higher star ratings, less frequent assessments. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in Arizona. I have a chart that follows this one. And then we conduct assessments in 1/3 of the open classrooms. And that does include our infant population, although up to this point, we're really excited that we have infant class, because up to this point, we've been relying on the ITERs to inform us about the environment just a little bit in those infant classrooms. And then we haven't had a component to really measure interactions and responsive caregiving, which we felt was really important, but we weren't getting there with just the ITERs. So how does our system work? Our system is a tiered system. Because of our licensing regulations, they are regulated by our legislature. We felt like they were kind of foundationary, but that programs needed an additional step in their environment before they actually were ready to engage in quality and process, in a quality process. Pardon me. So at our 1- and 2-star programs, our Rising Star and Progressing Star, those programs we just use the QRIS Act. If you score more than a 3.0, QRIS ITERS, the ERS tool, if you score more than a 3.0, it automatically trips off the classroom assessment scoring system. And then we use the class in all of your open classrooms. But you have to reach that threshold first to say, okay, we have health and safety practices in place. We have the environmental factors that we need, in addition to this, the foundation of what's regulated by our licensing standards, in order to continue to move forward on your journey to quality. In addition, we do have a 3rd component of assessment tools that we use called the Quality First Point Scale. It is a homegrown tool in Arizona that really measures staff qualifications, measures child assessment and curriculum, measures, I said staff qualifications already, administrative practices, because we felt like neither one of those tools really measured those 3 factors that we know are important when it comes to quality. If a program is at a Rising Star or Progressing Star, assessment comes out every 12 months regularly to provide additional feedback on for coaches so that they can continue to set goals and move the process forward. When programs reach our quality plus, or highest quality star ratings, then we find that we've been moving assessment to one in every 24 months. So that those programs are getting assessments once every 2 years to inform their quality assurance practices as they move forward. So implementing infant class. We started implementing class last year. We started with training all of our statewide assessors. We have 60 across the state that provide assessment services. So all of them were trained on the class tool. And then this year we have been working on implementing that statewide into our QRIS system. And right now we have been working out the kinks, running into challenges and solving them before we release the tool into the public. So the public knows, as we're looking at this implementation plan, that we are practicing, for lack of a better word, working out the kinks, establishing assessment procedures, establishing thresholds. Whoops, when it comes to this chart, where does infant class fit in here? We're establishing those thresholds this year. And they know that by next year, fiscal 18, which starts in July of 2017, when they start receiving assessment reports, they'll know how that information feeds into the report, what that says about their program, and how it maps onto their star rating system. So we've taken a full year to practice in the community, to inform the community about what responsive caregiving looks like, about what the infant class is measuring, before we're going to release them results. And then it'll be another year in fiscal 19 before it's actually factored into their star rating. So they have the opportunity to understand the tool, learn more about it, and really if they need to change some practices, because this is new to them, they have that opportunity before they have a posted rating. So this implementation is the same implementation in Arizona that we did use for the toddler class, and we found it very successful because the community really felt as though they're in the loop. They know what's going on, they're in the driver's seat, they understand the quality that they're going to be held to as we continue to phase this into the quality improvement and rating system that we have in Arizona. So one of the biggest challenges that we had is infants, toddlers. We have a mix typically in classrooms. We're using the toddler class already. It's actually factored into our rating at this point. And now we're introducing the infant class. And so how do we determine which tool to do? And so we started running into this challenge in one-year-old classrooms especially because of the cutoff scores. The infant class, of course, birth to 18 months, the toddler class 15 months up to 36 months. And so what we used as a protocol, and we've communicated this out to the public, is just a simple diagram that says, okay, if your one-year-old classroom, for those children who are 6 weeks to 18 months, or pardon me, 6 weeks, 12, usually we're dealing with one-year-old rooms, pardon me, 12 months to 14 months, and you have the overlap of 15 to 18 months, and if those two groups together make up the majority of the children in that classroom, then the infant class is the most appropriate tool to measure the teacher in that classroom, to measure the responses in that classroom. If on the other side, in your classroom, you have a number of children who are 15 to 18 months old, and then a significant number who are in that 15 to 36-month-old range, then we figured the toddler class is most appropriate. So in those one-year-old classrooms, our assessors are asking to see the roster, asking to take a look at who's enrolled, and then looking at those dates of birth to say, what's the most appropriate tool for your age range, if that teacher is randomly selected. That way we're using the most appropriate tool, even though there's some overlap that we have to deal with. All right. We do a random draw process, and this was the other thing that we really took a look at. When we're looking at a state QIRS or QRIS system, one of the things that we were most concerned about is we didn't want 100% of infant teachers pulled. We felt like that wasn't fair. Wasn't fair to the center, wasn't fair to the teacher to always, no matter when they had an assessment, always have to have the assessment in their classroom. Often we were running into the fact that in Arizona, maybe there's one infant classroom in a center that we're going into, and so if we're doing a third of the open classrooms and we're making sure that each age range is represented, that's what kind of led us to this 100% idea. So what we decided to do, we decided to actually look at doing a random selection between all our infant and toddler classrooms, knowing that because we're using both the infant class and the toddler class, we would have representation. Now, I will say we've been trying this for the last, well, we've gone through about 3 quarters, so the last 9 months. In our system right now, we have about 430, 420 programs that have infant programs, out of that over 1,000. And so it's a smaller percentage, and indeed that's true with what we've drawn. We've randomly selected about 38 classrooms to date, and been able to really use the toddler class in those classrooms, which is not very many, but when you look at that chart, let's see, I don't have very many slides, but when you look at this chart, we have a number of our infant toddler programs that are in that 3, 4, and 5-star level. They're not due for assessment this year. So even though it's our practice year, they haven't had the opportunity to go through that random selection process. So we're finding, to date, I'm going backwards, that's not helpful for anyone, I apologize. We found that this takes the pressure off of teachers, allows them to relax a little bit, allows them to really show us what is your typical practice. By randomly selecting instead of automatically them understanding that whenever I'm in my assessment window, an assessor's going to show up at my door knocking, asking to come in to use the infant class in that setting. I will say that right now, because the infant class, if an infant class is drawn, because it's not in our QRIS system and we still need the data to be able to determine an overall star rating, we do redraw for another toddler class. Usually they have multiple toddler classrooms open if we select that infant class. But we still have the data that we need to assign a star rating in this cycle, but that they also have the information about the infant class if we selected one. All right, so we've been working on establishing consistent assessment processes across the state. We had to develop a policy, although we thought we would never have to use it, but we have had to use it. Because our assessors come mostly out of the Phoenix metro area, they travel across our state, we found that we needed to have a policy for sleeping infants. Because we don't want you to wake your infant up, but if we're in cycle 2 and all the infants go down, which happens in our rural areas where we only have one infant attending that day, that infant goes to sleep, what happens to your class data? So we had to take a closer look at what might that policy look like. What's an appropriate time for the assessor to leave the site, because we can't just sit there and watch the walls melt with the teacher. That's nerve-wracking. And so we developed a policy where an assessor would leave for 30 minutes and then come back, and if the infant is still sleeping after the length of another cycle, then we would go ahead and cancel the assessment for the day. We want to do what's best for infants, and we were worried that we would see teachers trying to wake infants up because they're in the middle of their assessment process. So we had a policy. I will say we've had to use it a couple times. I didn't think we would have to. I thought it was just, we were doing some safeguarding. No, we've had to use it in some of our rural areas. We're still working with Teachstone. After we finish this year of gathering our data, we will submit it and kind of get a better idea of what should our cut score be when it comes to the infant class. If we're looking at quality, where does quality begin? Where should we say you can't have a responsive caregiving score below this in order to really ensure that you have the quality interactions that we know are beneficial for child outcomes. So that's a conversation we're still engaging in. We're hoping to gather some more data before the end of the year. And then we are looking at the fact that if we don't get a large enough subset, our data team in Arizona has been looking at, do we delay that implementation after fiscal 19 to fiscal 20 to allow for one more year of data collection? They're still looking at that because, like I said, to date, we've randomly selected 38, which they feel is appropriate, but they're wanting to make sure that before they add it into the rating scale, we are informed, and we're informing the public. We have the information that we need in order to communicate our standards out. So that's one of the things that might delay it by a couple of months. We're hoping that in this last year, or this last quarter, that we'll have some additional assessments. So I'm going to turn it over to Padma. This thing, oh, I'll switch your PowerPoint too.
While she's switching her PowerPoint, I'm just going to say, back in the day when we started with pre-K class and then we added toddler class, and I think some of the folks at Teachstone know that I've said that if environment rating scales was considered the prose, and I said class is the poetry, and so I am going to have to torture you all by reading a poetry. It's short, I promise you, it's not a long one, and it's something that, apart from my love for sports and basketball and Go Tar Heels, I just have to talk about this as well. So this is an author unknown, and it says, what are you doing teaching preschool? It says, there are those days when the logical mind says, you must move on and do a better job of supporting yourself. Those days when the logical mind says, why did you choose this career? It is not reasonable. If the heart can still the mind, then the answers are apparent. Perhaps logic did not play a great part in choosing our jobs as teachers. If we are truly teaching life's most important lessons to the little ones, the lessons of love, to love oneself unconditionally, and to share that love with the others. Perhaps we were guided and chosen to be in this place for teaching love in a confused, crowded, and often angry world is not something everyone can do. Though our wallets may not be overflowing, how many people are hugged and told they're loved by the people they work with each day? How many people own original artwork created expressly for them? How many jobs allow you to wipe away the tears and make the world a better place for others? How many people are allowed to see a tired, weary world through fresh new eyes, where all things are possible, to hear laughter and joy for no big reason, just for being? When the logical mind says, what are you doing teaching young children? Listen to your heart one more time. I did write that poem. Alrighty. Okay, infant class. I'm going to tell you, when that bundle of joy was delivered by Teachstone back in April of 2014, am I right? I think so. I might know the timeline better than Teachstone. Right. So when it was, we struggled. We actually, I'm going to go through this, if I can use the clicker, Katie.
The arrows are, down.
Down is forward.
Down is forward.
That's
Yay.
what kept throwing me off.
Okay, or we can start from back. Okay, this is where we are is in Florida. Just first of all, the geographical context. We are in Florida is in southeastern part of the United States, and Duval is in the northeast of Florida. So just the geographical context, and we have a very beautiful river, and we have the beaches, and there are lots of golf as well. This is just putting the statewide, the different states that have a statewide QRIS, and the ones in the red just have a local, county-wide, and we are one of the 6th largest in the state of Florida, and so we have a very robust, if I might say, it's a mature QRIS system that we have. And just like Arizona talked about the quality improvement and rating system, I think Illinois calls it the quality recognition and improvement system. We just started off with QRS. We just rated. And so we have, this has been a journey of about 13 years, and I've been with the coalition for 13 or more. And so we started with, in 2004, 2005, with very small number of programs, and then we moved on. All of these phases were pilot phases. This is where we branded it, calling it Guiding Stars of Duval. So Duval's the county, and the county seat is Jacksonville. And Jacksonville, just a little piece of trivia, it's the largest city in terms of land area in the 48 contiguous state. You can check it out on Wikipedia. And it's QRIS, we call it the Guiding Stars of Duval. And here, for 5 years, what we had was, we had an assortment of quality indicators. Anything that you could name, and we included it. Somebody said staff qualifications are important. Somebody said screenings are important. Somebody else said, oh my goodness, what their training is important. We assembled an assortment of indicators, and we said, we don't know how to come up with a point system, but we did. It was very cumbersome and very tedious, and it included a big part, and 40% of it was the environment rating scales. So we had ITERs, and then we also had ECRs, and then we, at some point, we just could not deal with having to go in and observe personal care routines, And so we kind of scaled back from that. And this is the part where we said, okay, we got a lot of pushback from the community, and we had to take a pause here just to do a study of our entire system to see what is it, how do we streamline it, how do we put it on Weight Watchers and just say, we can't just keep having all these indicators, it was just getting to be meaningless at some point. So we put the pause on it, and we did have, there was a big emphasis from our board for teacher-child interaction. So it was easy, we picked the pre-K class tool, but, at that time I think toddler class was just on the horizon, and I don't think they had quite done the reliability and validity testing, so we didn't know what we were going to do. And we still had to find a replacement for ITERS. And Missouri at that point did not, they had, there was something wrong with the legislature at that point. Nothing was wrong. It's just that I think they didn't want to continue funding it. And so they had something called the Infant Toddler Responsive Caregiver Checklist that they used. It had not been tested for reliability or validity. But so when we went from our system here, we moved it here, we did include the pre-K class, and we did include the Infant Toddler Responsive Caregiver Checklist. So it was really more about responsive caregiving, and as soon as the new bundle of joy arrived, and we were able to include infant class, we kind of, the third iteration where we went into is the Guiding Stars of Duval 3.0, and we have a major emphasis, and we include the babies, because we believe babies are born when they arrive. They are not born at 13 months. So, so we wanted to make sure, that's why I had to ask that question, because it's a struggle that we feel, because yes, as a percentage of classrooms, yes, we also have figured out that, when you draw a graph, it is, the infant class, the number of classrooms is not going to be as large as the toddler or the pre-K class, but babies are born when they're born. They're not born at 13 months. So, so here in this iteration, we have infant class, toddler class, and pre-K class, and it carries 60% of the weight for us. So just to give you an idea, so we have staff qualifications and professional development, which carries 20% of the weight. We have, that's program personnel. We have program content, which is 60%, where we have the infant class, the toddler class, and the pre-K class, and the program content with child screenings, child assessment, and curriculum, which carries the other 20%. So these bonus points, we just added in wherever the board members wanted a few things. So we had to include some of those, and it wasn't an option to make it so streamlined where we could just settle for only the top 3 content areas. Even this, some of it is structure quality indicator. Here with staff qualifications, if there's a way to simply move to process quality, that would be really awesome. And yeah, this is just our journey here, where we had infant toddler environment rating scale for about 5 years, and then we moved to the infant toddler responsive caregiver checklist for 3 years, and then now we have 16, 17. And how did we set up our cut scores? We did not send it to Teachstone, I'm sorry. We collected data from 66 classrooms within our own county. We have a whole bunch of folks who are trained in infant class. They're all, I even have trained the trainers here on my team. And if this room got emptied out for the people, if you say the folks from Jacksonville leave, it'll be down to 50%. So that's how we've collected. We went from 2007 to 2016-17. This is our process. And what we found was, much as I complained, I didn't complain, the infant toddler environment rating scale did set the stage for us. It did provide the foundation. It was necessary, it provided the foundation for this community. And then when we moved to the infant toddler responsive caregiver checklist, it kind of gave the idea of what to look for in terms of responsive caregiving. And then we landed on infant class. The top slide does say, I think, what do we measure with infant class? Just to let you all know, that's the question. And the child is saying what we are measuring is responsive caregiving. If any of you are curious, I think you should order this. It is a very beautifully laid out It is by Teachstone, and I'm not a salesperson for Teachstone, but just to let you all know, it has very basic indicators that they're looking at. But in the infant class, where it is relational climate, teacher sensitivity, facilitated exploration, and early language support, is very nicely organized. And what I did, okay. Alrighty, what is responsive caregiving? This is sort of my, I think it came from Teachstone, where teachers participating in shared experiences and infant play, attending quickly to infants' cues and needs. Then you read the rest. So that's pretty much in a nutshell is what is getting measured by infant class. And how did we set up the cut scores? These are the cut scores that we have within our current infant class. And we collected the data, and after we introduced it to the community and we went and did the infant class in a whole bunch of classrooms, our average score landed at 4.76. But when we talked to our entire community, where we have about, I think close to, between coaches and folks who support, there are about 30 professionals, and I have 8 assessors working with us. So we have a pretty large support process in terms of professionals who are supporting this endeavor. So we did decide to have this spread this way. And for now, we're going to live with these cut scores, and we're not changing it. And the decision by the board is we will only change it every 3 years. And infant class implementation, yes, we went through the board approval. The classrooms are all, we have a whole cadre of coaches who are coaching the classes. And there are mixed age classrooms, and when we had to do the mixed age classrooms, and I called Katie and I said, Katie, how are you guys doing? And we're scratching our heads. We have no idea how to, because I think the infant class goes from birth to 18 months, the toddler class, like Katie was explaining. What we decided was we will let the coaches decide whichever way they were coaching in that classroom, because that's how the teacher is getting coached. When we went in to do our star rating class assessments, we just went with the tool. So if the coach said, this teacher is getting coached, and it's not that we go into toddler classrooms and we administer the infant class. So we are very mindful of that, but it's worked out well this time. And we're also introducing infant class to our family child care homes. This will be our first year, so we're gonna have to see how that's gonna work out. And this is Dr. Papianto's quote. So I started with the poetry. I'm ending with Dr. Pianto's quote here. And I'm so glad Dr. Pianta and Dr. Humphrey came up with the tool. Set of tools. Alrighty. That's my presentation, that's Katie's presentation, and
I did have one thing to add, because you mentioned family child care homes, and in Arizona, we have about 177 family child care homes that are part of that 1,000 programs that I referenced in my PowerPoint. And we do use the class tools in family child care homes as well. With the way that our rating scale has been set up, we are not yet, we haven't transitioned over to the Teachstone recommendation of doing cycles in each tool, so that we make sure that those interactions are intact for all of them. But we do take a look at their overall enrollment and choose the tool that appears to be the most appropriate for their current enrollment when they're in their assessment window. So, any questions for us? We'll get you thinking, what's kind of bubbling up here?
can I quickly ask, I mean, what state, I mean, who's from a community that has a statewide QRIS system here? Okay, what state are you from?
California.
California.
Same.
California.
Georgia.
Georgia, okay, Bright Start. Okay.
So I was gonna ask you that, and I guess you answered it, that you're not doing doing like 3 cycles and 3 cycles, because we're kind of playing around with that, especially their family child care.
Yes.
Because we just started using the infant and toddler, this is our first full year.
And I would say no, we aren't doing that in Arizona yet. At this point, we are choosing a tool and sticking with it, based on the most appropriate, based on the age ranges that are enrolled in that family child care.
And we do 3 cycles.
You do 3 cycles?
No, we just do 3 cycles, period. Yeah, we're choosing the tool, and based on, you know, what the coaches tell us, we're sticking
Do you
with
just
it.
do,
Yeah.
do you do 4 cycles?
We do.
Okay.
We do. And we found, as we were looking at operationalizing this across the state, for consistency reasons, we found, because pre-K was the first class tool that was out, we found that administering it in very similar ways was helpful. So 4 cycles is still what we do. We code educational experiences outdoors for toddlers, but we found it was confusing teachers during that implementation for why are you coding outside, you're doing a class tool, because they'd been so conditioned with pre-K that unless they were doing something instructional outside, we have a lot of indoor-outdoor classrooms across the state of Arizona, and so we chose to kind of use those guidelines of when to code based on what our teachers in the state were used to on pre-K, and we've continued to implement those.
Yeah, we're coding outside and that kind of confuses people.
We got a lot of questions, Yes.
So that's a really good question because we in Louisiana also found that the pre-K was a little bit different from the toddler. My question is a little bit different. Do you find it difficult for your observers to go between the 3 tools, pre-K, toddler, and infant? Do you have them trained in all of them and they're able to switch really easily, or do you need them to do, you know, different amounts of reliability on the different tools to be able to do it well?
In Arizona, we require our assessors to be reliable on all 7 of our tools so that we can use them reflexively. We do not ask them to switch between the ERS lens and the class lens. If they get assigned a center for class, then they stick with the class there. They don't do any of the other assessment tools. But we do have them trained to reliability and ask them to maintain that reliability in all the tools so that we can use them reflexively across the state.
Do you do additional? So I know they have like the annual recalibration. Do you do additional calibration?
We do,
Okay.
we do. So, and we also are, require our assessors to go out with a lead assessor and anchor, 1 in every 10 assessments, just to kind of monitor the type of note-taking that they're doing and really double code with them as far as what are they gathering, are they still on track with gathering what we know is important for our reports. And a little bit of a plug, Virginia is a colleague of mine from Arizona, we're talking about how we actually, what's required to go into our report writing later on this afternoon, because we do require our assessors to take a fairly substantial amount of notes, because we found that in order to move the process forward, we're having to provide a level of detail to the coaches so that they're able to continue the improvement process. So.
Yeah, to add to what Katie's saying, yes, in Jacksonville, they're all trained. In fact, all our coaches are trained as well. So when I say our coaches, there's sort of a very clear wall, because just so that there is no conflict of interest, if you will. So the assessors do not go in and coach, and the coaches do not go in and assess. And so that's a very clear firewall, but all of them are trained. And in fact, I've trained the trainers, and all of them are trained in all 3. And yes, there's a level of mental gymnastics that they will go through, and they will talk about it. But you know, at least they're only looking at the class lens. They're not going in and wearing the ERS lens as well. So it kind of gives them. Just the framework is somewhat similar. You know, when you go from infant class to toddler class, but being mindful of the subtle nuances for each of those tools. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question to that. So I think probably most people who are trained across tools started with pre-K because that was out first. And in some ways, at least my own reaction is like, oh, the infant one's so easy because there's only 4 dimensions and there's fewer kids. I'm just curious if you have reflections, if you were starting with a new set of raters and you wanted to train them across all grades, across all age levels, if you think starting with the harder one pre-K first and then working back makes more sense, or actually is there like infant as a sort of intro and understanding and then working up? I don't know if anyone has thoughts or reflections. Just curious.
I mean, I have my trainers here.
So I have some thoughts on that, and this is purely anecdotal, but I will say in Arizona we found, and I've been part of our QRIS system since it started, what we found is the tool that our coaches and assessors find easiest is the tool that is with the age range that they use most frequently. So it's not defined by, oh, there's 10 dimensions here and 4 dimensions here, but if I was an infant toddler teacher, I'm going to tell you that the infant class and the toddler class makes so much more sense to me than the pre-K, because that's not the age range that I necessarily was a teacher in. So I don't know that we necessarily say this one's harder because it has more dimensions or this one's easier. We find as we're training our coaches and our assessors on the class tools, we find that they kind of self-identify, this one's easier for me because of the fact that that's the age range that they have the most that they can hook into as far as their knowledge base. Does that make sense? It's purely anecdotal, but I know we've seen that even with assessors who we're working them to reliability. We see, what is the barrier here for them? And a lot of times it comes down to, oh, they were this teacher for this number of years and they're having to let go of some of their biases to really look at what this tool is measuring and be able to measure it objectively. So for what it's worth.
I think for us anecdotally, if I will say from an assessor standpoint, and that a whole bunch of our assessors are here, I think when they have to go in and take the dreaded test every year to get recertified, I think they will probably say toddler class is where they struggle. It's because I think you have the verbal and the nonverbal cues and have to figure out, how do you calibrate this. So from an assessment standpoint, am I correct? Yeah, toddler class possibly. Yes?
Yes, for us, I think.
She didn't have a choice but to say yes.
But yes, toddler classes, like you said, is complex because you do have a nonverbal and the age range and the varying abilities and skill level within that age range. But for me, because we did pre-K for 3 years before we got to infant and toddler, that was easy for me. Like that's my first love with class. However, my love for toddler and infant has grown as well. So, and that's not to say infant is easier because for me, 4 dimensions and a lot of cues, a lot of watching rather than just writing. So that is pretty hard too. I mean, it's not like an easy task to sit there and watch and, and being responsive to those cues as well. So.
I've seen your hand up like 3 times. You still have a question? Yes.
Oh, I am so sorry. I
It's okay. I'm curious about home-based programs. Do you have any in your networks? What experiences, reflections, lessons learned have you come away with in implementing both toddler and or infant tools in home-based settings?
In Jacksonville, Florida, this is our first year that, again, they went through the same sort of migration from doing the FICRS, the Family Child Care Home Environment Rating Scale, to going to, we did not have an ITRCC, the Infant Toddler Responsive Caregiver Checklist. So they just went from FICRS, and now this is our first year with the infant class, the toddler class, and the pre-K class, depending on the composition of the classroom that they're going to have in the family child care home. So we will know. Maybe if you leave your email address or something, we can, this is our first year, and this is now in spring is when we're going to be going in and doing the observation for their star rating. And we've done it for some of the small collaboratives that we've had, and it's worked out okay.
I should have been more clear. What I meant by home base was, home visiting, one family.
Visiting programs.
Yes, exactly. No
You're talking
experience.
about the early Head Start.
Yeah. Exactly. That's what I was referring to.
Home visiting, I'm sorry. Yeah, no.
That's why I wanted to know more. If
We
you
have
some of
coaches.
those
We
You
do
go
have-
home visiting?
We do not go, that's not one of our, okay.
Yeah.
Let me make sure that I'm answering your question. Can I tell your question back to you, and then if I'm wrong, you can kind of, before I start off on this road that won't get me anywhere. So are you asking if we conduct assessments in childcare homes that are also early Head Start collaborators? Because we do have some of those in Arizona. Are you just asking, do we go into family, friend, and neighbor and some of those other less standardized family child care homes? Can you tell me a little bit?
Yes, and yes.
Second?
Because I'd love to hear your experience in that. We have home-based early Head Start programs that take home visitors into family homes and work one-on-one with one child or perhaps siblings and parents in an early Head Start setting.
Yes.
So that's what I was referring to. Now that infant and toddler class is not something that we use right now. It's just a thought about how we can incorporate, baby steps, of course, this discussion with home visitors and the work they do with their parents. But I'd love to hear some of those experiences you just talked about.
Well, when it comes to family, friend, and neighbor, I know in Arizona, that's kind of where they had to look at who are we really looking at for our QRIS system, and so we're hoping to bring in family, friend, and neighbor, but we have not yet. Right now, you have to be licensed by either the Department of Economic Security, and in Arizona, they license small group homes, up to 4 children, multiple ages, but it's usually just the provider themselves who's in that setting. We also have our Department of Health Services that does group homes, so that's up to 10 children. And then the participant can also have their children there. They have to have an assistant in that setting, but they're also regulated. So we have a couple of different family options, and then we have tribal family child care as well that we're working with. And what I will say is we do have early Head Start collaborations with family child care homes, where early Head Start, because of the rural community, has come in and helped the family child care support their standards so that they meet early child care standards, and then they're a natural, they naturally move to the Head Start program that's at their local preschool. That is a program that's in place in Arizona. For those programs in our star rating system, because they already have to kind of adhere to the early Head Start standards, we actually skip the FICRS, the Family Child Care Environment Rating Scales, and we go right to class. And what we have heard in Arizona is that our family child care homes love the class. They would rather do the class than the ERS anytime during the day. It's much easier for them. It's easier for them to show their interactions, the relationship that they have with their children, than have somebody come in and look at all the different pieces of their environment in that way. And so I would say that they have found it very, very beneficial. Now for our assessors, if there is a home visitor there, we typically will allow the participant, if they're a regular co-op, a regular parent coming in, a regular person that's there supporting them, we typically will have them either black out that date if it's a true coaching visit or someone that's supporting their skills, or if they're a regular part of their program, we'll observe them as well, working with the children. And that will be factored into their rating, and they're aware of that coming in. So I don't know if that totally answered your question, but it's kind of reflexive. We have a couple, we can talk.
And so, going back to which tool is easier or which tool is not, I was trained in all 3 tools within a year of each other, so the pre-K, the infant, and the toddler. And I really appreciated being trained in them like consecutively because I didn't hold a bias to any of them. I'm an infant toddler specialist, but since I got trained in them consecutively, it really helped. So I didn't have that. And then I got the IRS, ACRS, and FICRS right before that. So all 6 of those tools I have. Right. Yeah, so I was trained in all, or to be a certified observer in all 6 of those tools within 3 years of each other. So I don't have a bias to any of them. But leading on to my next question is, so you guys saying you're going in and doing coaching to one tool or the other. Do you ever have your coaches go back and forth between the tools to help the providers to quality?
I will say in Arizona, we do not do that, and I'll go ahead and let
Coach is here, so.
Yeah, we in Arizona, our coaches go in to work on best practices. They don't go in to say, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about the environment rating scales or about the class. We're really working on helping programs in that journey to sustainability. We really wanted them to identify what are these best practices and why are they important, and not necessarily say, well, I'm doing class now, or I'm passing class, or I'm failing class. We're really trying to steer people towards what are those best practices, how do you gain them, hold on to them, and help them continue, even if you don't have a coach there, 6 hours a month, supporting you around it, or 8 hours a month. Depending on your star rating, because our coaching services vary based on star rating. So more coaching for lower star rating, less coaching for higher star ratings, because we noticed that the goals were different.
Right.
And everything, but we don't necessarily coach to the tools. In fact, we've been trying to turn that ship slowly, because I think that as we started our QRIS system, that's kind of the natural place that people went. Is to try to just learn what each of the tools we're looking for, as opposed to looking at what do we know is best for children, and why should we do this in a classroom setting. So
What state are you from?
I'm Colorado.
Colorado. Okay, for the college star.
Yeah, and we have infant toddler class in our star rating, and we also have pre-K class in our star rating. And we do developmentally appropriate practices for all our coaches. And I also do the early Head Start coaching for our coaching childcare collaborative for that. And we coach to the best practices. We streamline or bring in any tool or whatever, you know, that the provider relates to the best. So we do the same. We do the same for that, but it depends on where star rating they're going, depending on what tool we go in and assess.
I think for us, I think everybody aspires to coach for best practices, but then there are nuances within those tools. I mean, it's because the framework has been provided, you know, and I mean, if you think about the environment rating scale, and if you didn't worry about we were coaching to best practices, and if the activity subscale occupied a big percentage, it was just not feasible not to look at the tool. Yes, you were coaching to best practices, but being mindful of the framework that has been provided, and so that you are incorporating the nuances within that. So I would say it's sort of a hybrid. Yes, we approach it with the aspiration of coaching to best practices, but also ensuring that we are mindful of the framework that we are going to go in to assess them with.
Yeah,
So.
and I'm in a rural area, so I do coaching and assessment, and we don't cross that line either. So if I coach a site, we have other people come in and do that assessment and we let our providers know that, even our home providers, and they get kind of eerie and they're like, ugh. I'm like, no, it's okay, because if I do it, I'm gonna have that bias, and they're like, no, we want a straight answer, so.
And we've had to reinforce that with our family child care providers as well, because they're a little more leery of a knocking on the door, and they're like, why are you here? One of those bridges that we had to cross as well is when it was time for us to do inter-rater reliability and double code, they thought they were having a licensing visit because we were showing up in pairs of 2. And every time, we found out later, every time that they would have a licensing visit, the surveyors would come in pairs of 2, and they felt like they were in trouble. There were times where people wouldn't answer the door for us.
Right.
We've been around for 8 years now. They typically will answer the door, and I'm like, oh, I got this. I know who that person is now. But it depends. We really had to do a lot of community education about, no, this is the process that holds us accountable. This is why you might see 2 people showing up on your door. We have about 30 seconds left. One more question?
Or you'll get a poetry. I'm just saying, and I can read it in 20 seconds.
Let's end with your poetry then.
End with the poem? Yes. All right. And it's actually on one of the Teachstone's blogs or something like that. It says it's today. Today, like millions of other Americans, this is sort of, tribute to the childcare provider. Today, like millions of other Americans, I went to work. I did not design a beautiful skyscraper. I did not write a proposal to save an endangered species. And I didn't drive a bus or fly a plane or write a crucial bill that would someday become law. However, I did spend time with some very important people. I read a story to an attorney. I sang the alphabet song with the Supreme Court Justice. I ate lunch with the pastor and patted the back of an engineer until he fell asleep. Taught a policeman how to tie his shoes and introduced an astronaut to the color red. Tomorrow, who knows whom I'm going to meet, but one thing is for sure, they will be very important, for they are our precious children and the hope of our future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.